top priorities, and I only get the second one, I think. What's the top priority?
Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. I want to welcome to our hearing on nuclear deterrence, the Defense Science Board perspective. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and for your service to the public. Our witnesses are all experts who have spent their careers in fields related to nuclear deterrence. They are appearing today in their capacities as members of the Defense Science Board, but all have long and distinguished histories and the topic of our hearing today. We thank you for the hard work it takes to prepare for this hearing, and our witnesses are Dr. Michael Anastasio, Dr. Miriam John, and Dr. William LaPlante. Without objection, I'll introduce my full statement for the record, but I would briefly summarize. In December 2016, in the waning days of the Obama administration, the Defense Science Board completed a report titled 7 Defense Priorities for the New Administration. It made recommendations to the new Trump administration on key issues in the world of defense. Chapter 2 of this report summarized years of work by the board on nuclear deterrence, which is exactly what we will explore today. The board has published 12 studies over the past 14 years on this topic, so it's clear the board has spent a lot of time thinking about this. As well it should. A defense mission of this importance seems worthy of sustained and focused attention. As the new administration and Congress goes forward with the nuclear modernization program initiated by President Obama, the board's experts help us take stock. They help us understand how nuclear threats are evolving and how we should compensate. They help us understand where we've been and where we should go. Our witnesses today will be able to provide the collective views and recommendations of the board as well as their own views as board members. Ensuring a credible nuclear deterrent for the long-term future will continue to be a major priority for this nation and the Congress and this committee. With that, let me turn to my friend and colleague, the acting ranking member from Washington State today, Mr. Larson, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctors, I join Chairman Rogers in welcoming you to the subcommittee. Thanks for helping us out. Ranking Member Cooper is unable to participate in today's hearing. He is pretty ill right now, just sort of kind of head cold and can barely speak. So I'm sitting in for him, and I know he'd be here if he could. So as independent advisors, though, the DSB has an important role to play in making recommendations to the scientific and technical matters to the DoD leadership. And in its 7 defense priorities for the new administration report, the DSB correctly noted that our nuclear forces remain a cornerstone of U.S. national security. I agree that this is one of the most important areas for the department and for our committee to focus on. Given how critical these nuclear systems are, and with costly modernization programs occurring concurrently, we can't afford to get this wrong. While I appreciate the vision represented in the report, I would be remiss if I did not mention the DoD still has been unable to provide us with a 30-year estimate on the full cost of nuclear modernization. It's not a matter of partisan politics. Members of this committee have been asking for this accounting across multiple administrations. In your report, you write that the budget for modernization, quote, will significantly compromise investments in conventional capabilities, unquote. This common sense observation should alarm those who seek to downplay the impact on the defense budget of nuclear modernization and provoke all of us to understand the inherent trade-offs that are looming. There are other elements of this report that I find concerning. You recommend prototyping and fielding low-yield nuclear weapons. I found the justification to be unclear. Are these intended to address new threats, to enable us to reduce our stockpile of other types of nuclear weapons, to deter a Russian escalate to de-escalate scenario? Are they to keep nuclear weapons scientists sharp and interested in their mission? These are all very different objectives. I have not seen sufficiently detailed analysis of what proposals are, whether they're necessary, what alternatives are being considered, what the trade-offs are, what the costs would be, and of course, what the policy implications are. I also find this recommendation to run contrary to General Hyten's testimony yesterday. During the full committee hearing, General Hyten stated that the deployment of nuclear weapons is always an attempt to achieve strategic effects and disagreed with the distinction between tactical and strategic nuclear weapons. Smaller nuclear weapons would require prototyping. However, Dr. Richard Garwin and Dr. Roy Schwitters, both of the eminent Jason's scientific group, strongly criticized the need and value of manufacturing prototypes of new nuclear weapons in written comments to this subcommittee last year. I'm particularly concerned that new types of nuclear weapons would have significant policy and proliferation implications. Adding new military capability and building new nuclear weapons would be a radical shift, one that Congress, rightly so, has not been willing to approve for nearly 25 years. This approach could lead to a requirement for renewed nuclear testing, a policy shift that would be unwise, unnecessary, and have potentially disastrous consequences in re-legitimizing nuclear testing and helping to advance our adversaries' nuclear forces. The DSB report more explicitly opens the door to the potential need to resume testing. Until now and for the foreseeable future, our top scientists have confirmed that there's no need to resume nuclear testing to certify the current stockpile. Still, there is much to commend in your report. It highlights correctly, I believe, you get ice cream sometimes with the Brussels sprouts. It highlights correctly, I believe, the need for investments in detection and monitoring technologies which can reduce the threat posed by nuclear proliferation. With new technologies such as 3D printing emerging, these investments can support current and future non-proliferation and arms control agreements with a robust technological foundation. The report also correctly identifies some of the geopolitical complexities that have challenged our nuclear deterrent. These include proliferation of nuclear weapons and our allies' concerns that U.S. may be weakening its security guarantees. As a candidate, the President expressed support for proliferation and seemed to threaten the sanctity of the American security to our allies. It's my hope that as Commander-in-Chief, he understands the destabilizing effects of these statements. A 2014 report, DSB report, warned that, quote, for the first time since the early decades of the nuclear era, the nation needs to be equally concerned about both vertical proliferation, the increase in capabilities of existing nuclear states, and horizontal proliferation, an increase in the number of states and non-state actors possessing or attempting to possess nuclear weapons. Monitoring for proliferation should be a top national security objective, but one for which the nation is not yet organized or fully equipped to address, unquote. Your comments and insights on this issue are most welcome. I would be interested in more specific recommendations in support of this mission, particularly with regard to what gaps remain and how we can use advancing technology and analytic approaches, including big data analytics, to improve our capabilities. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I want to let the witnesses know that their entire opening statements will be accepted for the record. If you would like to just spend your 5 minutes summarizing, that's fine, or less. I will take the first witness, Dr. Anastasio, for your opening statement. Okay. I understand that you have a joint opening statement.
Yes.
And Dr. John is going to present that to us. And then the other two, if you have an opening statement you want to submit individually, we'll take that for the record. With that, you're recognized, Dr. John.
Thank you. I lost the coin toss. Chairman Rogers, is it acting rank? Do I have to say acting? Ranking Member Larson and members of the subcommittee. We thank you for the opportunity to testify today concerning nuclear deterrence, the Defense Science Board's perspective, and we are here representing the Defense Science Board. We're going to discuss our principal findings and recommendations over the past 15 years' worth of work, and as you noted, they're summarized in Chapter 2 of the report that we issued in December. For those that are not fully familiar with the Defense Science Board, we are indeed a federal advisory committee to the Secretary of Defense and a source of independent scientific and technical advice. Our tasking, we do not invent our tasking. Our tasking comes from department leadership and occasionally comes from you all, from Congress. And typically it's to address tough problems that may not have a lot of structure, like cyber or nuclear in the early days of its emergence, and or problems that may present, on the positive side, game-changing opportunities. We've done a lot of work in things like directed energy over time, autonomy, and electronic warfare. There are currently 46 members of the board, and we come from a wide variety of walks of life in the national security arena. The three of us represent, over 100 years of experience in the nuclear area. And when we wrote that down, my God, I felt old. All right. For the topic of this hearing, namely the DSB's perspective on nuclear deterrence, we have summarized over a decade's worth of work in Chapter 2 of our recently released 7 defense priorities for the new administration. based on what you've already heard this week, and especially yesterday from our military leaders, you're probably not going to learn much new from us because there's a lot of harmonization of views. It's just that we've been saying it a lot longer, I think, than they have. Our working assumptions have always been that there is no more important defense objective than preventing a nuclear attack on the United States or its allies. And the foundation for prevention is deterrence. 3 key points that we would make around that, and you can find them in the report, although they're not stated quite this succinctly. The first, the threat environment has been evolving in very troubling ways. Since the end of the Cold War, the United States has sought to raise the threshold for nuclear use, at least for ourselves, by emphasizing dramatically improved non-nuclear or conventional force capabilities. Unfortunately, others have gone the wrong way. Let's just say different directions, in part because they can't afford to overmatch us conventionally. Russia has modernized and expanded the capabilities of its nuclear force. China has expanded both its nuclear and non-nuclear forces, and we face a new and unpredictable nuclear proliferator in North Korea. We've also seen attempts to at commerce in nuclear know-how and materials, and attempts at acquisition elsewhere. Name them: North Korea, Libya, Pakistan, Iran are on the list. The second point, modernization of the Triad and the infrastructure to support it is long overdue. The Triad remains a key component of the nation's deterrence posture. The platforms and warheads have aged well beyond their original design intent. In addition, critical elements of the DOE production infrastructure are very old and inefficient. We simply can't wait any longer to renew all 3 legs of the Triad and to assure their operational viability and readiness. Our third point, and this is the one that may engender the most discussion, we must hedge against an uncertain future. We should expect, we already are, but we should expect that it won't change, that the future holds a very dynamic geopolitical environment for us, that the advances in science and technology are happening at a breathtaking pace and are happening on a global scale. And continued attempts by adversaries will be paramount in thwarting U.S. advantages. To ensure a robust deterrence posture, besides the Triad, there's much more to the story, and we believe there also need to be healthy efforts to, one, deepen our insight into the developing capabilities, doctrine, and threats of current and potential adversaries. So we've got to keep an eye on what they're doing. We need to ensure a very robust nuclear command and control and communication system. We need to ensure the survivability of U.S. forces, both nuclear and non-nuclear forces, in the face of their use of nuclear weapons. And we need to ensure a demonstrated, flexible, and adaptive capability to respond to changing threats through a strong research and development program. And finally, and equally important, we need to prevent further proliferation through both cooperative and unilateral measures, through the tools of diplomacy, and through renewed and strengthened efforts at assurance of extended deterrence to our allies. The linchpin of all this, of course, is the demonstrated skills of the talented, knowledgeable, committed, and valued people who are part of this enterprise. With that brief background, we would be happy to take your questions.
I thank you, and I recognize myself for the first set of questions. The DSB report from December says that we should focus our nuclear weapons R&D on concept and advanced development, prototyping, placing options on the shelf should be needed rapidly. It goes on to say, already the DoD can anticipate the need for capabilities such as hardening or maneuvering for defensive penetration. In this open forum and in more detail later, when we're in our classified session, would you please explain why the DSB and DoD anticipate needing to pursue capabilities like maneuverable warheads or lower yield primary only missile warheads?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to be careful.
Well, what you can't say here, we'll say in the classified.
No, I understand. I'm just getting my thoughts right. I think the issue is the developing capabilities in our adversaries, like the Russians and the Chinese, with more and more capable denial capabilities, denial our access for our systems. They have to believe that if a president ever made a decision to use it, that it would get to its target. And if they develop capabilities to try to deny us that, then we need to assure that we have alternate ways to do that. And I think that's the origin of the thinking about how do you anticipate what might be coming from an adversary and have our deterrent be in a place where we can counter their capabilities. And so we should be thinking about the kinds of options that we in the military might have to do that. So that, how do you anticipate what a future threat might be, and how are we going to be prepared to deal with that?
Based on the threats we see developing with our adversaries, when do you think we're going to need to be able to fill these capabilities that you referenced?
Well, I think they're developing capabilities now, and we can talk more about that later. And I think it's up to the military and the Defense Department and all the leadership of the country to decide, what actually needs to get done when. But I think those capabilities are developing, and we can talk about that later.
Okay.
I would just add Chairman Rogers, that to my colleague, that one of the things that the science and technology community must do is always understand the limits of what physics and engineering can be done. That's separate from what the threat is assessed to be.
Yeah.
So we have a duty to understand things like the maneuvering, what is capable technologically, and what could be done to counter it, both ways, offensive and defensive. We have to understand that and be ahead of a potential adversary. So just from a technical edge and an engineering edge, we have to understand that. And then watch, as you say, and as the threat evolves, or if operationally there's a change, we can provide to the policymakers, to the leadership, what the technology can do or what it can't do.
Do warhead life extension programs truly utilize all the design, engineering, science, and manufacturing capabilities that would be needed to produce a new nuclear weapon?
You want to start?
Not completely, Mr. Chairman. What we're doing with the life extension programs is largely renewing the capabilities, the systems that we had during the Cold War. And in some cases, we're having to make some accommodation to the fact that certain materials and so forth are not available anymore. But largely, we're replicating something that we had. What we're not doing is exercising that full end-to-end partnership with the Department of Defense and DOE to think about what a requirement might be. How would you go implement that requirement and with the constraints that get imposed, and then carry that all the way through to developing a weapon system out the door that could potentially go in the stockpile. And we have not exercised that full system process since the end of the Cold War for over 25 years. So there's a skill set that's involved in doing that process and the collaborative work between DOE and the DoD that we haven't fully exercised. Certainly doing the LEPs exercise part of it, but not that full suite.
What should Congress do to improve the stockpile responsiveness program to get after the problems you've described here in your report?
Let's see. We saw your authorization for the stockpile Preparedness Program is a huge step forward, but it's authorized and it's not appropriated. So there needs to be some continued encouragement that DOE put money behind it, but it's also important that it's a partnership with DOD, and it's not on the radar screen at DOD to think about the future at this point, because there are trades to be made between what you put on the weapon, what you put on the delivery platform, and across the board, they've got to be concerned about the new threats to new systems that we're putting forward, and I would throw out cyber as something that this community is just waking up to thinking about.
Okay. Thank you. The chair recognizes the ranking member for any questions he has.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the 014 report warned of this vertical proliferation and horizontal proliferation. It led to a provision in the NDAA at the time calling for a national roadmap identifying cost gaps, opportunities to partner with industry and academia to improve nuclear verification. We're still waiting to get that report 3 years after the provision in the bill. Do you think that report should be a priority for the administration to answer those questions?
Well, since I was a prime mover behind that report, you would see me say, yay, verily. Because for one thing, technology has moved forward in ways that would allow us to do a much stronger job at what I would call early detection of proliferation, where you have many more options to either cooperatively or unilaterally thwart the acquisition by a new proliferant. I will say that my somewhat limited insight into things that have happened around a presidential directive in the last administration created some working groups across the interagency, and I had the opportunity to spend a day with them about a year ago. And I had never seen so many different intelligence community representatives who knew each other and were sharing information. Now that's the good news, and you say, why is that happening? Well, it's a very small community still. So it's been easy to make the connections. We on the Defense Science Board are about to publish another report that really hammers home this early warning piece, and the potential for the tools of big data management and acquisition and data analytics, and the promise that holds, particularly when you tap into open source, for the sort of queuing that you would need on where to look and all. So continued emphasis on that, because it's a new paradigm for the intelligence community to step up to this.
Yeah,
Could I add one more thought to that, which is that as technology evolves and as we do more R&D, you can imagine that the paths to proliferation can change, and there's when we get in another room, we could talk more about opportunities like that could be out there that would be non-traditional paths, and hence the R&D community needs to help the intelligence community understand what are the potential threats of the future that might come about, and how would you look for those too. So it's not just monitoring what you're used to monitoring, but perhaps there are other things you have to look for.
Would you argue then this could help us with detection and verification as well?
We really didn't touch the verification problem in what we looked at. We started out to, because we had anticipated a more robust arms control agenda when we started the study in 2010 timeframe, and that quickly fell apart. But at the same time, arguing among ourselves, we actually were taken with the fact that we had a problem with proliferation, that seems to be cropping up, in many different ways. And so let's take a step back and figure out if we've got the tool set to be able to deal with what we see coming.
Yeah. Would you suggest that be on our plate, subcommittee, to look at that? Yeah, the verification. the use of these new tools and how it applies to verification?
I'm not sure, because it depends on what treaties are going to be honored by our partners who have signed up, and
Yeah, sure.
and the like, as to how much you put in the verification piece of it at this point.
I think there's been work done in the past to think about how you do verification on what potential agreements might look like. And if you get to the point where you're starting to count warheads themselves, the individual objects, how would you do verification of that, and how could you agree on protocols for how to do that, et cetera? And there's been work done on things like that. And so that might be something that's worth the committee getting updates on. But it does depend on what you might think an agreement of the future might look like.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back for other members.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that you've done on these important issues. You talked about the lack of funding, and you talk about the modernization that Russia and China have done in recent years, but we have not done because of lack of commitment and funding. And I think after meeting with some of the uniformed people that we've listened to this week, we know, and previously also, we know the way forward. We just have to have the financial commitment to do the modernization and upgrading and enhancing reliability and safety and security. If we don't do that, what is the risk that our nuclear umbrella has if it begins to develop leaks? If the 30 or so allies that rely on our nuclear umbrella have doubts as to whether we can actually carry through on our commitments, will they begin to contemplate developing their own nuclear programs, for instance?
As you note, Congressman, the fact that we have put off modernization for lots of reasons until where we are today, where we basically have no more life extension can be done. That is one of the reasons why we're in this situation today, where you have in the 2020s all this stuff that has to happen at the same time. We can't push it anymore. It's remarkable that we are flying the B-52s today in the nuclear mission, and grandfathers, sons, and grandsons literally of the same airplane. It is absolutely remarkable. As former Chief of Staff for the Air Force used to say, it'd qualify for an antique license plate in the state of Virginia. So I think, as getting to your question about, well, how does that deal with our allies, giving them a confidence? Well, no matter what you say in terms of your commitment, if you don't do it, and if you don't keep your systems current, people are watching. They're watching not just what you're saying, they're watching, are you really going to extend and go into the next version of Ohio replacement? Are you really going to build this bomber? Are you really going to do it? And not just talk about it, not just study it. And we're sort of at that point where we're either going to do it or we're not. And because you can't life extend. So I would imagine everybody's watching what we do for all the reasons that you implied.
Just to add a little color here, I guess. There are discussions that have been ongoing, I'm sure you're all aware, in South Korea and Japan. You know, they're not the majority yet, but the noise is there. And my God, the last week, the Poles, the Germans said maybe we better start thinking about a NATO European-owned deterrent. So, you know, we've got some fraying around the edges here. And so it's part what we do. It's also part what we back up with our words and actions. So
Let me ask about one other possible erosion of our nuclear umbrella, and that is the lack of testing. It's been 25 years since any tests have been done. I think we can be confident today that our weapons would still perform as needed, as advertised. But as each year goes by, we're going to lose, I believe, some of that certainty. And the day will arrive when we need to negotiate with with near peers about maybe a one-time round of testing, and negotiate it. What threat do we have? And I'll disagree with my colleague to my left. What risk do we have if our credibility becomes eroded because people don't have confidence that the weapons will actually, or at least all of them, will perform?
Let me try to take that one on, since I had the honor to write 9 of the letters, annual assessment letters that go to the President and Congress about the need for testing. And I would reiterate that I believe, and that I think the Defense Science Board believes, that there's no need for testing right now. Mm-hmm. And the way I think about it is that nuclear testing is a tool. It's a technical tool to help us do a job. And our view is that the job we have today, we don't need that tool right now. The question becomes, would I need it in the future? Mm-hmm. Well, part of the question, the answer to the question depends on what my job is in the future. And there are potential versions of the job, like the job we had in the Cold War, for which we would say we do need nuclear testing. But if the job looks like the one we have today, I think the view is that we don't believe that's an essential element, a tool for us to get our job done with confidence. So it's a tool to be used, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish when you do it. And the other piece is our chairman of the Defense Science Board reminds us, we should be humble about the future. We don't know what the future is going to look like in 10 or 20 years. And so to make a blanket statement about what it is we need or don't need then is probably a fool's game.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of things to discuss here. I think you're spending several $1 billion on a testing machine in Lawrence Livermore, aren't we, Dr. Anastasio? How's it working?
I believe you're talking about the National Ignition Facility, the NIF.
Oh, yes, that's what I'm talking about.
I'm not I don't work at Lawrence Livermore anymore.
Well, I know you're familiar with it. You
Yes,
spent
sir.
a lot of time teaching me about it, so.
Yes, sir. And it's good to see you again, sir. I think the Defense Science Board has looked at NIF and have felt it was a valuable tool and asset for the Stockpile Stewardship Program.
Okay,
And I
we'll
think
let it
that's-
go at that.
And
And
I think I'll say that much.
I think we need an update on that. It's an important element in what Mr. Lambone just talked about. I want to go to a recommendation here about tactical nuclear weapons. And under what circumstances does the board assume that we would be using them?
We were puzzled by the reference to us recommending tactical nuclear weapons because we never wrote that. We just
And
didn't
how did I
say that.
come to believe that you did? Maybe
Well,
somebody's interpreting your
Yeah,
work?
I think somebody decided what we meant to say was, but.
What did you
know,
mean to say? Where are you with
Just-
tactical nuclear weapons?
We don't, if there is a military need, if the military stands up and say we need it, then the enterprise will respond. But there is no military requirement right now.
Let me be sure that I understood. As far as the board is concerned, you know of no military requirements for tactical nuclear weapons.
Today,
Well, there is tomorrow. Well, how about low-yield weapons? What is the purpose of a low-yield weapon?
Well, currently, without going into any detail here, we have weapon systems that have low yields.
Yes, we do.
As you know. And so they have a purpose. We have a requirement. The enterprise has a requirement to produce those, and that's fine. I think the discussion that you've seen in this document was intended to be along the lines, we don't know what the future brings. We do see what adversaries are off doing. And I think the board felt it was prudent for us to spend time thinking about how might we respond to a different requirement than we have today sometime in the future. Would we be ready to respond to that?
In other words, to have a low-yield tactical nuclear weapon? Okay,
Or
low-yield
many different kinds of options that could be possible in a future. And are we ready to be able to respond to that? So it's a capability question. It's not a recommendation that this is something that the country should be doing now. It is a desire to be capable of thinking about such a thing in the future.
Well, help me think about it for a while. We do have a nuclear weapon that has a quite low yield.
Yes, sir?
And a quite high yield. Does that meet the potential anticipated needs that you're thinking about? If not, why not?
Let's see, I'm trying to think of how to answer that. We don't have a requirement for something other than that. So what might happen in the future is speculation. Okay. So I think what we're trying to our intent was to distinguish between the technical capability of this enterprise versus the policy questions. We were not trying to address the policy questions of whether that's a good thing to do or an appropriate thing to do sometime in the future. It was more, are we as an enterprise collectively in the DoD and the DOE capable of responding to a different requirement than the ones we have today? And that's a technical capability question versus a statement about what the policy should be.
I'm out of time. I'll come back.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Abraham, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witness for being here. The DSB's reports from December emphasizes, and I'm going to quote, that the nuclear weapons are a steadily evolving threat, end of quote. Would you please describe how the nuclear weapon threat has evolved, particularly since the last NPR? I think what was written in 2010. The new threats, the new vulnerability, opportunities that have emerged or changed since that 2010 report.
Let's see. We'll be a little bit careful until we go into the classified session, but certainly there's plenty of awareness in the public domain that Russia is fielding their modernized systems. They've been at it for since the late 1990s to retool their capabilities, and that includes a number of advances in their air defense systems that present very thorny challenges for us to be able to penetrate Russian airspace. In addition, the Chinese have gone from order a dozen strategic weapons, as in long-reach weapons, to something like 100 or so. And look at North Korea. We've underestimated them every step of the way. So I'll stop it at that.
Okay, and we'll pick this up in a different briefing. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Chair, now recognize Ms. Hanabusa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. I think the problem that I'm having with this is that when we talk about nuclear deterrence, you seem to imply in your report that there is both nuclear weapons but also non-nuclear weapons that can also act as deterrents. And you talk about the Triad, and we had a session yesterday where I was telling the military members who were sitting where you are that, I think the assumption of the Triad was something that I questioned right off the bat. In other words, how can you say something that's been in the shape that it's been for all these years? You talk about modernizations, which you also talk about, and then somehow the modernization includes the structure that's been there for all of these years. So what I'd like to ask you is, when you talk about the deterrence of nuclear weapons, and you also mentioned the non-nuclear weapons, what are you talking about? And when you talk about modernizing the Triad, it seems to assume that somehow the inherent structure of the Triad is what we need. And I just can't understand how, when you sit here before us, that would be something that you would begin this whole discussion with. So if anyone can take a stab at that.
I can start by saying the board believes and enforces the fact that the Triad is lower on the escalation ladder, as you imply, conventional. But God forbid, if all of those failed, all we have is the Triad, and that's our point. Now, the other point about the Triad is each leg of the Triad has unique characteristics, and they're actually complementary with each other. The ICBMs, in order for an adversary, as I just described it, and having it be modern, and having it be proficient and credible, is the state that we're in, and that's what the board emphasized in its report.
So when the board says it should be modern, I guess that's the problem I'm having. When I understand the SSBM. I understand the move from Ohio to Columbia class. That I understand. But when you talk about bombers or ICBMs, how do you modernize ICBMs? And your other statement that I find curious, you said we use it every day. How are we using ICBMs every day?
Right now, there are people in the missile fields, in the LCCs, airmen in the LCCs, that are airmen doing that mission. So they're doing that mission right now as we speak.
So are you saying we're deploying ICBMs every day?
No, deterrence posture. We have right now SSBNs in the ocean. We have ICBMs in continental United States, and we have bombers. Those are all part of an active deterrent that operates 24/7.
So when you say we're using it every day, you're not meaning we're actually using it in the conventional sense. You mean just their presence is sufficient to be the deterrent?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, that's the point. The point is, there's the 3 C's of deterrence: credibility, capability, and clarity. And this is part of the capability. We have to show that we have this capability.
My time is almost up, so we'll continue this in the next session. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentlelady. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we talk about the Triad, I'm often concerned about the next generation bomber. And given our capability in terms of cruise missiles, of precision guidance, guided munitions, of those things, how important is it to have, is that part of the Triad in terms of having a next generation manned bomber? Is that dated, or is that still as critical as it's always been?
The board has not, as far as I know, actually, the Defense Science Board has not addressed that specific question. I have personal experience in this in my previous job as the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, but the board has not answered that. But I would say that it's a policy of the United States that, and the plan, that the next bomber, the B-21, is replacing and is that part of the Triad. And as the Air Force has stated publicly, initially it's going to be manned, but they're building in the hooks and the capabilities. If there's a potential future that it needs to be unmanned, they don't have to start from scratch.
Okay. Redundancy is a term we hear repeatedly when discussing the nuclear triad and our ability to retaliate in the event of a hostile nuclear attack. How vulnerable are our satellite detection systems to Chinese and Russian kinetic kill or directed energy anti-satellite weapons? Are these systems redundant in any way?
I'll try to answer it, but because the board has looked at space, and there's a limited amount we can say in this open session, but are you saying, is the Triad redundant given anti-space capabilities?
Anti-ASAT capability.
by an adversary, for
Right.
example. No, it's not. In fact, quite the contrary. The idea being that these, like I use the example of the SSBNs and others, we have to have ways that the Triad can be a credible deterrent, even in the most extreme warfighting scenario, and including in a space situation. So while we can't go into the details here, nuclear command and control has to be robust enough to deal with the fact that space is going to also be contested. So communications that use space have to be considered, redundancies, resiliencies to deal with that to make sure the Triad works. But no, in fact, the Triad is supposed to be able to be robust against the full spectrum of space threats, cyber threats, and God forbid, a nuclear threat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Connor, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you agree with President Ronald Reagan's statement that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought?
I think it's the hope of all of us that we'd never have a nuclear war.
That wasn't his statement. He said it must never be fought. I mean, it can't be won. I mean, do you believe that he was correct, or do you believe that we need to reconsider President Reagan's approach to nuclear weapons?
I think
because the times have changed, and do you think that, are you here saying that his thinking is outdated, or do you believe that his thinking still applies?
I don't know if I could speak for the board in that regard.
Let's see, let me help Mike out a little bit. That's a policy statement which we, representing the Defense Science Board, really, would act upon or not. We will say that we start with prevent nuclear war, and the foundation for that is deterrence. And as I believe one of your briefers said yesterday, and I can't remember who it was, or no, General Kaler might have said in different testimony, that the paradox of deterrence is that they have to be convinced that you actually would use it. But that's, we've devoted our lives to putting substance behind that proposition. And if you think there's a better way to do deterrence, I think we'd love to hear it. So
I just want to get your views in terms of, I think President Reagan, and I disagreed with him on so many things, but I think many people would say that he had an aspiration for peace. He, if you read his biography, said that he never wanted to see nuclear war. That's why he came up with Star Wars, whatever you may think of it. And my question is just, he clearly would disagree with what you're proposing, at least from his public statement. So are you rejecting President Reagan's legacy on this issue, which would be fine? I mean, you could say we're in different times, and President Reagan didn't know what he was talking about when it came to nuclear deterrence, and you have a different approach. I just want to see if that's your view.
I don't know how different it is today, because the most significant modernization program, last modernization program, was in his administration. Modernization of our nuclear weapons.
Yeah, we are living off the modernization, many of which was done during the Reagan administration. The Ohio class, the Minuteman. And so again, the Defense Science Board is not a policy board. Now, clearly, the objective of having a triad or a deterrent is stability. And stability is, as my colleague here said, is what you're after. You're after stability. You're after stability. And the paradox is, to get stability in deterrence theory, you have to have a credible capability. That's the paradox.
I guess I still want to just get to the point. I agree with your point on modernization having been done there, but your quote, which is in the Defense Science Board's report, that you believe in a more flexible nuclear enterprise for limited use, that basically what you're saying is that we should have a first strike option if it's in our strategic interest. Is that not correct? I mean, that's how Senator Feinstein characterized it in her op-ed this morning.
I would suggest that that's not what what the board believes. What we believe is, as my colleague said, we're not making policy recommendations. What we're trying to say is, in an uncertain future, are we capable and prepared to respond in whatever way the policymakers in this country decide we should? Are we prepared? Are we capable? Can we go execute that if that were something that was required of the community? And that's one of the things that we believe has been ignored in recent decades, which is, how do you think about what potential things you might have to do in the future, and how do you assure the country that, and our adversaries, that if this country has to go a different place, that we're ready to go there and capable of doing that. And so it's not making a policy recommendation that we should do this or should do that. I think that's a misreading of our report.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take issue with my colleague from California's interpretation of Ronald Reagan's policy. You know, President Reagan believed and said that war comes not when the forces of freedom are weak. It's actually when war comes not when the forces of freedom are strong. It's actually when we're weak that we're threatened. So wouldn't you say that the fundamental to the notion that nuclear war should never be fought is the idea that our forces must in fact be so strong, so able to overwhelm any adversary that they understand they will not survive such a conflict, that in fact deterrence requires both a characterization and a calculation about the threats we face, but also ensuring the lethality, the modernization, the effectiveness of our force across a broad array of circumstances so that our adversaries never mistake any action that we take for some sort of indication that they could actually prevail in a nuclear conflict.
Yeah, and it's a risk benefit. It is, does an adversary believe that if they take an action that they would gain more benefit than they would have to pay a cost in our response? And I think my comment back to the previous question was along that line is, how do we make sure an adversary believes that whatever avenue they try to follow to negate the military capability of this country, whatever avenue they pursue, that we're ready and capable of responding in whatever way we have to convince them that whatever benefit they think they might accrue, that's not going to work, and that we can impose a cost that's much more significant than the benefit they think they can gain.
I would just add that the classic deterrence theory is, and this is the hardest part, is you're really trying to get, well, all that matters is inside the head of the adversary or peer that you're trying to deter. And so, as one of my colleagues said, the idea behind deterrence, the theory of deterrence is fundamental, is that, as he said, whatever action that this adversary, potential adversary, are going to take to their advantage, that they must be convinced that the downside of taking that action will overrule any upside they will get. That's the theory.
Thank you. And I think it's important also, just for the record, to point out that it was the policy of President Reagan to ensure that we had superiority across the board, including in our nuclear forces, so that, in fact, we could guarantee that nuclear war would never be fought. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right, that's Oh, okay. Chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just ask unanimous consent to enter into the record January 11th statement from Roy Schwitters and a January 11th letter from Richard Garwin, both with regards to peer review and design competition in NSA National Security Laboratories.
Without objection, so ordered. We are now going to stand in recess as we move to, what room are we moving to? To another room. We're in recess.